Hello and welcome to the morning warm-up from Monaco, live here on Eurosport. A slightly later start than usual for the final half-hour chance to fine-tune the car and for us to see whether Damon Hill can keep up the pace that he set in a thrilling second qualifying session yesterday.
Damon Hill is one of 26 men who are taking to the track, and of course this final 30-minute session is as crucial as ever, and a little bit of smoke or something from the back of Katayama's Tyrrell Yamaha. And the reason it is crucial is because, as we saw here for the first time last year, pit stops for refueling and for tyres will be again a feature of this year's Grand Prix. And for Damon Hill, the man on pole position, it is as important for him to work out the correct strategy, because in reality I would expect to see more overtaking on this circuit this afternoon being carried out on the pit lane by quick, sharp, clean pit stops than we're going to see on the circuit itself. And for Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill, they're the World Championship leader and current second place with only 1 point between them. This race is going to be a real grudge match.
Well, a big battle also in the Constructors' Championship to look for this afternoon, with Ferrari leading that Constructors' Series by just 1 point at the moment. But they had a pretty bad day. Well, we've got a Minardi in trouble already down at the Lowe's hairpin. It looks as though it's Luca Badeau. A little difficult to say from this distance, it has to be said. But, well, Ferrari definitely having a difficult day yesterday, John. It just all went wrong for them.
Well, particularly for Jean Alesi, because he had a problem with the hydraulic system on the car. It came to a rest literally just feet from the pit lane entrance, but he received outside assistance. That's the part of the track that he stopped. And apart from that, of course, the repair to the car would have taken quite a long time. He was allowed, or the team took a decision to curtail Gerhard Berger's qualifying, and I'm sure Berger wasn't really over the moon about that, because it meant that he didn't get all the laps that he would have liked to have had the chance. And when Alesi got into the car, he only had one flying lap in a car that was set up somewhat differently to his regular car. He wasn't able to improve, so really Ferrari, all expectations from Friday evaporated with a disappointing Saturday.
Well, Luca Badoa is climbing out of his Minardi. It looks as though some sort of engine problem has been reported actually already, so Luca Badoa not having a very successful start to this warm-up. He's qualified 16th for the Grand Prix this afternoon. He's out-qualified teammate Pierluigi Martini for just the second time this year, and both of the Minardis quite well up this weekend, but well, obviously disappointing to see that he's down stopped there at the Lowe's hairpin. Now, out on the circuit at the moment is the man who was involved in a very strange accident yesterday. The Japanese driver, Taki Inoue, driving in the arrows, the footwork, Hart, and, well, he ended up on his head yesterday when the car was being towed back to the pit lane, and his car was actually hit by the safety car being driven by French rally driver Jean Ragnotti.
A bizarre incident indeed, and a great embarrassment to the Automobile Club Monaco, because they are the responsible party in that incident. And the outcome is that Inoue's car, the rollover hoop on the car, in fact, was broken away from the main chassis. The chassis now is junk, and somebody's going to have to pay the footwork team for that. Fortunately, no injury to Inoue himself, although he wasn't permitted to take part in qualifying on Saturday afternoon. That was just a precaution. He had a further check this morning with Professor Watkins, the Formula One doctor, and passed fit to drive. But this is the spare footwork that Inoue is in, and just again getting out on the circuit, refamiliarizing himself, and just building back up the confidence that he may have suffered a slight shock when he found his car upside down against a guardrail. The irony of it all is that he was being towed back. I believe, I'm not certain, but I believe that he didn't have his seatbelts attached, which, you know, he got out of the car initially, then got back in to be towed back. So there were a lot of little anomalies that lessons have to be learned from. But clearly, Jean Ragnotti doing a number of quite quick laps in Renault Clio. This is the Evolution rally car with an FIA delegate or an FIA employee on board, Francisco Langanese. So I think that to say there was egg in the face is probably the kindest thing you could say.
Well, Taki Inoue out on circuit in this warm-up, getting some valuable laps under his belt. He has qualified last. He's 26th and last on the grid for this afternoon's race. A quick note that Pedro Diniz, who we all know has had a fairly difficult time in the 44 this year. It's a new team, he's a new driver to Grand Prix racing, and so far every Grand Prix he's been either last on the grid or second to last. He's had his best qualifying here this weekend, and he's going to be starting 22nd ahead of Jos Verstappen and Andrea Montermini as well, so ahead of one of the Syntex and one of the Pacifics.
Well, Jos Verstappen, lots of problems. Saturday morning he reversed it into the barrier, and in reality the car was not ready for qualifying until almost again the closing moments. Got 4 laps but not sufficient, and he's starting all the way down in 23rd. So Verstappen, somebody at the back who will clearly be looking very early to make progress. But as I mentioned in our review last night, and again repeated just before we went live here for the morning warm-up, the first corner is Saldivo. It is always a corner where you've got to be careful, whether you're at the very front of the grid or at the very tail of the grid. That corner has caught more people out probably than any corner in any circuit in the history of Grand Prix racing. So for Verstappen or for Damon Hill, try to get round that corner, please.
We're watching Mika Hakkinen now, who's qualified 6th fastest in the McLaren Mercedes. He was a little disappointed at the end of yesterday's second qualifying. He got a little caught out by yellow flags at the end of the session, particularly with Eddie Irvine's accident, which happened just a little bit further down from where we are right now. In fact, this area of the circuit, Eddie Irvine crashed his car fairly comprehensively, and that obviously affected some of the last laps of some of the quick runners, and Mika Hakkinen was one of those. But nonetheless, a good performance to have the McLaren Mercedes there in 6th position on the grid.
Well, talking about the driver, first of all, you'd expect nothing less from Mika Hakkinen. The guy is just lightning fast at anything. And McLaren have made further progress. They had a 4-day test after the 4-day Grand Prix in Spain. Hakkinen did a lot for what is a driver, maybe boring work, but it's important work for the team. It was information gathering, and he came here with a car that basically appears better than it did, let's say, in Barcelona. But Hakkinen, as ever, 100% committed. But he was the guy that caused, in fact, Damon Hill's problems here last year. Just too eager at the start. Again, Mika, 1 year on, 1 year older, hopefully 1 year wiser.
We can see the classification, but it's very early days in this warm-up at the moment. The 2 Syntex fastest at the moment, Jos Verstappen ahead of Schiattarella, then Martini. We'll be back after the break with more from this morning warm-up in preparation for the Grand Prix. Welcome back to the morning warm-up from Monaco. Jean Alesi has just gone fastest, and we're taking a look at the man himself. Onboard camera looking down and watching his fairly unique hand positions on the steering wheel. Very high hand positions on the steering wheel, but it's certainly working once again for him. He's fastest, and Mika Hakkinen is second at the moment.
Well, that Jean Alesi high handheld steering wheel is very reminiscent of Alain Prost. They both seem to drive a car in a way which is unique to those two people. And currently Alesi is fastest, and Mika Hakkinen 0.1 of a second slower, but very early days in this 30-minute session. We've just something under 20 minutes remaining, 19 minutes and 53 seconds. And as the minutes count down, the teams come back to terms with the circuit, because since we left you live on Saturday afternoon, there have been Renault Clio races and Formula 3 races, and in fact that Renault Clio race was like watching synchronized motor racing. There was an enormous first lap shot. So the circuit does change, and it takes a few moments for people to readjust and readapt to that. Also, cars will be running with nearer to the amount of fuel they will start this race. Now, since most cars have got fuel tanks on board which don't carry much more than 130 litres, that's probably the largest amount, and many have got a smaller capacity. Clearly, pit stops are going to be a big part of the Grand Prix. So what do? You decide to try and do it with one stop, which some people can do. Others are going to be forced into doing 2. Others may opt to do 2. Last year, Schumacher won by using 2 stops. Will that be the case this year?
Jean Alesi now not far behind Damon Hill. We've got a white flag which indicates either a course car or a slow-moving car. It looks as though it was a slow-moving car, and it was Andrea Montermini in the Pacific. Now, he did have problems yesterday. They had gearbox problems which denied him the chance of going out in second qualifying. Part of the reason for him being so far down on the grid, because he had actually gone pretty well on the Thursday qualifying session. So I don't know whether Montermini's got more problems or whether he was just moving out of people's way, but it didn't look too promising. Alesi back into the pits But Damon Hill is now going round, really just beginning to pick up the pace. The man who's taken pole position for this race this afternoon. And that's Jean Todt in the Ferrari pit. We're back out on circuit now. There is David Coulthard. So we've got both of the Williams Renaults out on circuit. And Coulthard is being chased by one of the Benettons, and it looks as though it's Johnny Herbert. Yes, indeed it is, who's qualified 7th.
Well, Coulthard starting 3rd on the grid. And again, a first-timer here, and a very impressive performance this qualifying on Saturday was. And greatly impressing the team. And here, not to support Damon, but just enforcing the lockout that Williams have got on the front row of the grid. So Coulthard and Damon Hill squeezing Michael Schumacher. And once again, I keep referring back to the start. The two Williams and the Benetton in between. It's going to be a cracker.
It certainly promises to be good stuff. David Coulthard, great performance, as you say, John, and he said afterwards that he really hadn't expected quite how difficult this circuit would be to learn. He knew it was going to be hard, but just quite how difficult surprised him.
Well, the circuit, learning any circuit, is a relatively fast process, but what is so special about Monte Carlo is that you've got to find a rhythm, and it's so important here, because if you're erratic, you will just find it impossible to find time. You've just got to relax, almost go into a sort of like a yoga state where you totally relax your body and allow yourself to flow freely. When you can do that, then the times will come. And in fact, when we saw Damon Hill during the qualifying, when he was out of his car, it's as if he's doing something to himself, looking inside of himself to try and focus clearly on any time when he would go back out. And certainly his last laps, when he achieved that stunning qualifying time, I believe that thought process that I thought I saw Damon practicing contributed greatly to that lap.
Ayrton Senna once commented that on one of the qualifying sessions here, I think it may have been 88, when he was so strong that he really got into that state. He was almost driving beyond himself, and he actually had to come into the pits when he realised that he was at that point. Welcome back to the morning warm-up here on Eurosport. And let me tell you that Gerhard Berger now has gone fastest. Berger's done a 26.079, and that's about 4 seconds off the pole position pace. But that's what we would expect to see in the morning warm-up. Now there is Damon Hill. Looks as though he's about to jump in the spare car just to make sure that all is well with his optional car for use for this afternoon. But we're watching now the man who's qualified 2nd fastest and the championship leader by just 1 point, Michael Schumacher. Well, Schumacher had his problems yesterday. He was bashed into the barrier at one point, just at this section of circuit, in fact. Heinz-Harald Frentzen overtaking him. The back end of Frentzen's Sauber stepped out, clouted Schumacher's car, and that pushed him into the barrier. And that cost him a lot of time, both in the morning free practice, and it also cost valuable setup time, not only for the qualifying, but for today's race as well. So Schumacher will be keen to make up for that lost time now. And he's in fact now 2nd fastest, with Hakkinen 3rd, Blundell 4th, Jean Alesi 5th, and Eddie Irvine in 6th position. Now we've been joined in the commentary box this morning by a star of the music scene, Chris Rea. Chris, enjoying the Grand Prix at Monaco this weekend. But of course, you're not only a man very involved in music, you've actually raced on this circuit. Last year you competed in the Porsche Super Cup. What did you think of the track when you raced it for the first time?
Well, after watching it for 35 years, from black and white TV all the way through my childhood, through my youth, it was a wonderful experience to actually go around the Monaco circuit, and I couldn't believe actually how tiring it was. It always looks wonderful on the old films. You see the drivers coming on. It's a lovely sunny day, but actually it was sheer hell. It was at 138 degrees inside the Porsche, and quite an experience.
Now you're quite a Grand Prix fan, and get to how many Grand Prix throughout the year, would you say?
As many as I possibly can. The only trouble I have is A, I never know what I'm doing next calendar-wise, but B, I like participating in motorsport as much as watching it, and sometimes I'm crossed whether I should be at Castle Coombe or whether I should be at Monaco.
Well, Michael Schumacher has just taken the fastest time there. He's done a 25.940. That puts him just ahead of Gerhard Berger and Mika Hakkinen. Have you been watching the season closely so far this year? What has been your views? I mean, the battle between these two, Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill, we saw it so much last year, and it started again, hasn't it, this year?
Well, I think it's actually really good. It's turning into a wonderful battle, and also Ferrari are just on the edge. they still can do it, because there's still a lot of races to go, and anything can happen.
We've got Jean Alesi. He's just stepping out of his race car by the look of it at the moment, getting ready to perhaps try his spare. You're a bit of a Ferrari fan yourself, Chris. You've done a fair bit of racing in Ferraris. Does that mean that you'll be looking for Jean Alesi? That's Marc Blundell, by the way, who's gone off down at Saint-Devote, down into the escape road. We saw him do that during the qualifying sessions as well. So hopefully he'll be able to rejoin. Let's just take a look. Well, he didn't actually lock up, interestingly enough, but he obviously decided that he'd gone into the corner too quickly and that it was a safer bet to go down the escape road. Just taking a look on board as well. Can't see any lock-up, though. You see the front tyre still turning. So whatever the problem there for Blundell, I guess he was just making safe rather than sorry. He's already wiped off the front end and the rear end of his McLaren in terms of the front wing and rear wing in two separate incidents this weekend. Maybe just being rather careful on this occasion not to do the same. But Chris, we were talking about your love of Ferraris. Does that mean you want to see an Alesi or Berger win today?
We all do, don't we?
Well, I think the whole of the pit lane, actually, if Jean Alesi won, I think even the likes of Benetton and Williams would not be too upset about it in many ways.
I honestly think that one day Jean Alesi will come by off the last corner, head towards the finishing line, and if the winning car is in front, I honestly believe he'll be able to stretch his neck by 30 yards.
Well, there is Japanese driver Taki Inoue, and the man who had that incident yesterday that we were talking about. He's had a spin. Let's see if we can see what happened here. Very inexperienced on this type of circuit, Inoue. Really hasn't done much in the way of street racing. Raced in 3000 last year. Well, we can see he just locked the front wheel and it sort of pivoted around the front. Doesn't look as though he really hit anything, though.
He's praying there isn't a safety car on the track.
That's right. Hoping that the Jean Regnotti isn't chasing around after him. Well, still Schumacher fastest, Gerhard Berger second at the moment, then Mika Hakkinen third, Blundell is fourth, then Jean Alesi fifth. Johnny Herbert has now come up to sixth place. And look at this, yellow flags being waved as McLaren picks its way through. That's Marc Blundell having rejoined after his little escapade at Saint-Devote. And it looks as though Inoue's car is going to have to be craned away, so that's a little unfortunate. But Irvine has now come up to seventh position, Irvine, who had a shunt at the end of yesterday's session, who felt that he was on a very good lap. And Chris, you've been speaking to Eddie a bit over the weekend, I know. What sort of mood is he in this weekend? Confident, do you say?
He's exactly as Eddie is, always is. He's completely non-committal. One wouldn't think that he was actually going to race. He's so cool. I would be frantic, and he's so cool, and once he gets in the car and the visor goes down, but he's a born natural talent, a real find.
Well, indeed, Eddie Irvine is already being talked amongst the...
He was running 1.2 second lap faster before he came off.
That's right, indeed. He was on a very good one.
I do have a question for Mr. Watson. Why do Monaco firemen wear metal helmets?
Well, John, that's a good question for you, but I don't know if we... I didn't really hear it because there's so much noise in the commentary booth that like the headset.
Chris was asking, did we know why the Monaco marshals and fire extinguisher holders all wear the special helmets? We only seem to see it here in Monaco.
Well, that's part of their standard firefighting equipment down in the Principality, but also it's a great photographic opportunity. And I think the first time they used those visors was maybe 7, 8, 10 years ago. And in all the annuals that come out at the end of the year, of course, everyone had a photograph reflecting an image in the visor of one of these firemen. But clearly they use them, and well, if they have to use them, it helps reflect, I'm sure, a lot of the heat as well.
Michael Schumacher then still with the fastest time, but you can see the time fairly close between him and Berger. We're on board with Jean Alesi once again. The man who was so frustrated yesterday, and those pictures of him in the pit lane, classic pictures of just sheer disappointment when he couldn't get back out in his car. He couldn't re-challenge for pole position, and well, such disappointment for Alesi. He really will be out to make up for that today. But starting from 5th position on the grid, it is not going to be easy for him on this particular circuit, that's for sure. Well, one of the problems that Ferrari have been having over the course of the year so far is a loss of power throughout the course of the race. We've seen it on several of the races so far. Do you think that will be a problem here?
Well, when you say a loss of power, first of all, they're not running the qualifying engines in the race, so that accounts for a certain lack of horsepower. The qualifying engine is very, very powerful indeed. The other factor is that the engine itself, the beach well configuration, is not let's say, burdened with too much torque. That's the part of the engine characteristic where coming out of a corner like Saint-Devoux, for example, the engine really drags the car out of the corner quickly. Renault have got a superb engine, provides both top-end power and very, very good mid-range torque. Ferrari have got top-end power, but they lose out. So you talk about engine performance, you're talking about more of the characteristic. Again, I think that's Pierluigi Martini getting in the way of Jean Alesi, and we've seen Pierluigi Martini over the last 2 Grand Prix at times be less helpful than he could be. But everybody at Ferrari, although they bemoan the fact that the V12 engine will not be used in 1996, the new V10 is the right configuration. It will be very powerful, and it'll probably sound like a V12, but it will only be 10 cylinders. And that's the engine that Ferrari need to put into this superb chassis to, if you like, to fill the final pages of this Ferrari rejuvenation in. And cars and traffic everywhere as they exit around the swimming pool. So we have to wait, I think, until about August when that engine is first run on the bench. It's unlikely it'll be in the car until the beginning of next year. We have just to wait.
John Alesi about to start another lap, but as you saw from the classification, it's now Mika Hakkinen, and indeed we switch cameras and go on board with Mika Hakkinen now, who set the fastest time. Now this is an interesting performance from Hakkinen, a 25.246. We've still got just under 5 minutes to go in this session, but Hakkinen once again very much on the pace. He's been quick through all of the sessions so far this weekend. He's now fastest ahead of Alesi, Schumacher third. And where are the Williams, you may ask? Well, they're down in 15th and 16th at the moment. They haven't done very many laps. Damon's done 9 laps, and David Coulthard's done 7. But 15th and 16th places. Interesting.
Well, I just wonder what Williams are up to. Are they maybe trying, let's say, a one-stop strategy? This would be the time that they might choose to do it. But, of course, being so far down in terms of times, every other competitor in the pit lane will be alerted to that. But no one wants to give away any secrets. I suspect Williams know actually they've done enough preparation in the 2 1.5-hour practice sessions to know what their race plan is going to be. In the meantime, Gerhard Berger, the man on screen we see now, quickest car on the track. Ferrari, of course, that V12 engine tends to use more fuel than the V10 Renaults or other V10 engines or V8 engines for that matter. So they, again, relating to performance, when they refuel, their initial performance after a refueling stop is probably slightly inferior to that of their direct competitors. But by the time they've used half the fuel, they're more or less on power with their competitors, and then they tend to run at about the same sort of speed. So the whole situation is complex, and they really need that engine, that V10 Ferrari engine, as soon as possible.
So Jean Alesi's just gone fastest as he's gone past us. Cross start finish line 24.959, as you can see, and they're the difference between him and Gerhard Berger, a fractional difference indeed. It's been a while since there's been a Ferrari win here in Monaco. The last one was back in 1981 when Gilles Villeneuve won. Big gap for Ferrari fans here in the streets.
Yeah, Villeneuve won in a car that I think can generously be described as being a camel. It was the most goddamn awful Ferrari I think that they produced for a long time, but it had a superb engine. I mean, loads and loads of grunts, and all Gilles had to do was just potter through a corner, nail it in a straight, and nobody could even have a chance. We didn't even smell it. And he went on and did that, of course, in the Spanish Grand Prix a little bit later in the season.
And you had the pleasure or the difficulty of being behind in that train as well at Jarama, so a frustrating time.
Well, I have to say I was quite pleased, because while it held everybody up, had the field been much more spaced out, maybe I wouldn't have finished third. I could have finished second, but I might have finished fourth. So you'd have to take what you get at face value and be thankful for it.
We'll take a look at Mika Hakkinen there. He's now third fastest, just ahead of Michael Schumacher, but it's still the 2 Ferraris up at the top. Eddie Irvine has now come up to 5th position, so his optimism earlier this morning seems to be well-founded.
And Irvine, in fact, is using the spare car because there was some chassis damage as a result of that accident just coming out of Tabac. So he is in the spare tub. I believe that's what they were saying last night. So Irvine in 5th place back into the pits, and that's very encouraging for Peugeot, of course, who are looking for a podium to harmonise with what they had last year with Marco Brundle.
Johnny Herbert is 6th fastest, with Mark Blundell 7th now. Damon Hill's just worked his way up to 8th fastest position, having completed 12 laps. Olivier Panis 9th, and Martin Brundle is 10th fastest. So the two Ligiers 9th and 10th in the times at the moment. Gianni Morbidelli 11th, and Coulthard is down in 12th. Then Heinz-Harald Frentzen 13th, and Barrichello 14th. Well, here's a little example with Mika Hakkinen trying to get past Gerhard Berger. Both of these next to each other on the times at the moment, so this is an interesting comparison, but in fact Berger moving out of the way.
He'll not be doing that in some 4.5 hours time, because this is one circuit where really, as long as you don't make a mistake, you can have a string of cars behind you for the entire Grand Prix. It is really, I would say, impossible in a race situation to overtake a competitive car. The only chances of coming out of a slower corner, maybe somebody is a little bit aggressive on the throttle. But even then, it's so easy to defend your position. So once again, we're going to see the outcome of a Grand Prix being decided on the strategy and on the speed of stops. Now remember that those pit stops are governed by the amount of fuel you're putting in. And with a fuel rate of something like 12 litres per second, we will have a pretty good idea of what people are going to do. The amount of fuel required for the Grand Prix, probably less than 200 litres for Ferrari, or about 200 for Ferrari, but certainly less for Benetton and for Williams. So they'll be starting with something like 65 or 70 litres of fuel. I just wonder if somebody might do what I anticipated happening in Barcelona, and again, Michael Schumacher being the person, and Benetton, the team that tends to take chances on strategy. Because Schumacher's not on pole position, would they maybe consider doing something with a low amount of fuel for that first sprint to the first stop, in an effort just to out-accelerate Damon Hill and make sure that Coulthard, who's directly behind him, doesn't slide up alongside him.
Well, the checkered flag is out. As you saw, the time remaining had come down to 0, and Jean Alesi just about to finish off his lap. 24.356, he's fastest at the moment. Is there any improvement on it? No, he does a 24.674 on that last lap. So Jean Alesi, it looks as though he is going to end up with the fastest time from this warm-up session. Makes up a little bit from the disappointment of yesterday, but in some ways it's just as frustrating, because he knows that he could have done a good lap yesterday and perhaps challenged Damon Hill for the pole. But that's motor racing, that's life, and he's got to try and do the work here this afternoon in the race. Gerhard Berger, second fastest, so the two Ferraris, 1 and 2, and there's a lot of Ferrari fans here. We're very close to Italy here, of course, in Monaco, and there's plenty of Ferrari fans who'll be cheering about that. Michael Schumacher, third fastest, Mika Hakkinen, fourth, Johnny Herbert, fifth, good performance from him. Damon Hill down in 6th place, and as I say, both Williams seem to be not quite as pushing quite as quickly during that session. Olivier Panis, 7th, Eddie Irvine, 8th. Then the two Brits again, Mark Blundell and Martin Brundle, and then David Coulthard is 11th. Gianni Morbidelli, 12th fastest. Martini, good performance, in 13th. Heinz-Harald Frentzen, well, he'll be a bit disappointed with 14th, but he lost a lot of time yesterday after a big accident going up towards Casino Square. Rubens Barrichello, he'll be disappointed with 15th. Then Luca Badoa, Ukio Katayama, Mika Salo, Jean-Christophe Pouliot, and Jos Verstappen. And then the final 6 cars there on screen, with Taki Inoue, the Japanese driver, rounding out the field from the warm-up this morning.
Well, nothing untoward, but 2 Ferraris quickest this morning. I don't think that's going to be significant when we come back in just under 4 hours' time, because it is Damon Hill, Michael Schumacher and David Coulthard who are ahead of those 2 Ferraris, and that's an enormous advantage on this circuit.
So a great Grand Prix in prospect. We know it's difficult to overtake, but we also know that the traffic here can cause problems. Mechanical failures are not uncommon here either, and so there's plenty to play for here this afternoon, and the battle for the World Championship between Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher will continue over the 78 laps here in Monaco. Well, you'll be able to join us live, of course, here on Eurosport. We'll be bringing you all of the news and action as it happens, so please join John Watson and Ben Edwards. We'll be on air this afternoon. Remember, the Grand Prix starts a bit later today, so we'll meet you back then.